start out by tell us what's going on in Taipei?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alan. I'm do agent work for an agency called Awesome Agency. Work with a lot of underground artists worldwide, and I run a party series called Customs out here. We try to kind of do some international meets national kind of things for Taipei. That's an extension of what I was doing back in America when I lived there, but now I live here in Taipei. It's been 3.5 years. It's been great.
Yeah. I'm Ju, underground DIY community art space. And I also curate exhibitions monthly, as well as arts and music and cultural events, and art and music festivals. So one that you played at. And Taipei's doing good. Everything's basically normal out here. And honestly, the people who sort of sounds and looks like this dystopian movie that we just can't really relate to. Because everything's totally normal. Like just earlier today, Al and I, we were at this like really big like art fair. It was like really packed and intimate, like everyone's kind of rubbing shoulder to shoulder, and that kind of stuff just happens daily. And I think that's in like harsh contrast to what's this stuff just like living our.
Not trying to gloat about
about
our situation. Hard to understand what it's been like to been quarantined and cooped up for the last 8 to 10 months. Like it's just something we can't understand.
Yeah, we can't
imagine. And to feign that understanding would also be patronizing.
Yeah, it would be insulting.
So wait a minute. Let me just clarify this. You guys have not been quarantined.
Correct. No, there's been no stay-at-home orders in Taipei the entire epidemic.
Yeah, I think there was like a week or two where the government was like, well, try to socially distance yourself, like when you're out and about, just try to keep like a meter's distance. That was like going on for a week or two, where the streets were like a little bit emptier than usual. But other than that, it's just been business as usual.
Okay, so wait a minute. That's so crazy.
There was also about a month in April, I think, March, April, somewhere around there, where there were some restrictions put on, like in April, May, where the clubs were asked to reduce the amount of people that they could have in the buildings. And instead, they just kind of tacitly agreed to shut down for like a month or so. And that was kind of like when things were peaking everywhere else, especially China. And then I think like mid-May, end of May, things opened up again, and we haven't had like domestic cases like since then.
It's been like 250, 270 days since the last case.
Oh my God!
What we mean by domestic cases, like someone inside the country getting it from someone else inside the country.
Yeah, because there's been like imported cases, like business people or someone that was living abroad coming back home, and then they got it, but then it's like the second they get off the plane, they go into quarantine, so they're just like segregated.
It's about what, 10 a week?
Imported cases.
Someone that are detected when they get off the plane, they have to do a quarantine, they get checked out. We haven't had a death since like that first wave, like maybe February, March.
I think there's been like 7 deaths.
Yeah, total.
Man,
like right at the beginning.
You guys really. That is.
Again, we're not gloating. We're not gloating. We feel for the.
We're worried about our friends and family back, where it's not Taiwan.
And Taiwan's a very like an island, and it's like a very stable population, so they can kind of do things. There's been heavy contact tracing. Everywhere you go now, even like at the DIY art fair today, they have a contact tracing like QR document where if someone were to get sick, they would just they would contact everybody and they would trace everybody, but no one's gotten sick.
Yeah, but it is still like a really incredible feat considering like I don't know, a tenth of the Taiwanese population actually works in China.
Mm-hmm.
So when this was happening, when COVID was blowing up, it was like Chinese New Year, which is a huge migrational period for people because a lot of people who work in China or have family in China or Taiwan or whatever, they're flying back and forth a lot. And so like the fact that it's also been Taiwan's been handling it so well is also crazy because we have like we're so closely tied to China and we're also so close to them physically.
Yeah, I mean, that is really like, I almost can't believe that we're having this conversation because, I mean, the vibe in New York is so insane. It's just like, it's been going on for so long and there's so much that can't happen. And it's really, I mean, of course, there's the concern about people who have and are getting the illness. There's remorse over people who have passed. And there's, some amount of fear, I think that's much less pronounced now. But more than that, it's really just that everybody's life has been so disrupted. Unemployment is super high. Everybody who's kind of in the situation that I'm in, who's running some kind of a space, is scrambling around trying to do everything they can to keep that going somehow. And people are coming kind of undone. It's like a very tense and weird dynamic. It requires like an enormous amount of stamina because what you're doing like every day is like trying to figure out some new angle, some new approach. Like, how can we do this differently? How can we still be doing something? And then you're always having to re-envision that because things are always changing. Things are always changing economically. There's like a stimulus package. There's not a stimulus package. There's unemployment. Then there's not unemployment. Then there's more unemployment. You are allowed to have X number of people in your space. Now you're not allowed to have people in your space at all. So it's this constant dance of trying to adjust. And then every time you have to make an adjustment, you have to completely re-envision what you're doing. And a giant amount of people have left the city. And it's just a really, really, at this point, it's been going on so long that I don't think people really understand their lives in reference to how their life used to be. We're all just thinking about ourselves and our lives in reference to this situation. Like, for example, the first 3 months of quarantine, you're thinking about what you were doing in March. And you're like, okay, I'm doing this other thing while we ride this out, right? But then at a certain point, it's like, this is just my life. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's really wild and it's really mind-blowing to talk to some people who just haven't been experiencing that, which I applaud and celebrate, and I'm happy for you. But let me ask you, what... I mean, because you're saying it's an island and it has a very stable population, but then you're also saying there's a lot of back and forth between Taipei and China. What do you attribute the ability to just stop this thing in its tracks to? Like, why did Taipei have success at that? Or Taiwan writ large?
So like maybe like 17 or 20 years ago, if you remember the SARS outbreak,
Of course.
like Taiwan, I don't know, not that many people died. Like I don't know, maybe it was like 20 people, but that was like a massive hit just like to the Chinese people just because they they don't want to lose anybody to anything that could even be possibly prevented. So ever since then, they've been setting up like systems of response. Ever happen again, similar to the SARS outbreak. And so when like in December, when there were rumors going around of a possible new virus, when everyone else was dismissing it, Taiwan, it's also like partially due to Taiwan's relationship with China. It's very, Taiwan doesn't really trust China. There's like a lot of history there, but
Sure, yeah.
basically, it says something. Taiwan's just history of like knowing that it's probably anyway.
Taiwan always assumes the worst.
Taiwan always assumes
Whenever
the worst
anything
when it
comes
to
from
China.
when it comes from the Chinese party,
Yeah.
everything Taiwan assumes the worst.
Yeah. So they just sent their own scientists and doctors over there to check it out, and then like they stopped like travel between China and Taiwan, and they moved really fast. And so that was one part. And another part is due to like the transparency and the like hacker. She's this like she's just like super awesome. Like if you haven't heard of her, you should look her up. But she's just like a major advocate of like
Julia, I'm sorry to interrupt
government.
you. Julia, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The internet cut out for a moment when you said that person's name. So can you just say that person's name again and then keep going? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Audrey Tang, the digital minister of Taiwan. She's like the youngest minister, and she's also
she like was like very old, useful language, and she's done a lot of TED Talks and stuff like that. She's a very international face for I think Taiwan's new government.
Yeah, and she's all about like transparent government and like the government like needing to. I don't know. It's just like I think she has a huge role in it, and she developed like a bunch of systems like very early on to just like they just move so fast. Like for example, when people kind of started freaking out a little bit about like lacking of masks, they developed like a bunch of apps so that you can like see which stores still have masks, so that there's not these like massive lines or scrambles. And they also like pause like mask. They like the government to control mask production so that they could like distribute them evenly, and also like hoarding of resources is like highly illegal. And just like so many procedures were just put into place super quickly, and transparency was big. What else am I missing? And also Taiwanese people are just like society as a whole and taking care of each other. And so there's not a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to do this because like it makes me uncomfortable. Everyone's like, okay, even if I'm uncomfortable, if it benefits other people, like we're all up for it, like group effort. And so that's definitely, I think that also contributes to it.
I think one of the things that lends itself to that, and not only that, but like Taiwan's need for self-sufficiency is, because of Taiwan's kind of nebulous identity and like idea of it being a country or not to a lot of countries. Like we're not recognized by the U.S. as a real country. We're not recognized by Japan. We're not recognized by the World Health Organization as a real country. So if we really get into deep trouble, like we don't have this international representative bureau that will like bail us out with some sort of assistance. We can't rely on like a UN effort to help Taiwan in any official manner because they can't recognize. So we knew early on, and we knew because of SARS and that happening before, that Taiwan would have to actively fight and we couldn't do a herd immunity or anything like that. We have to snuff it out and like keep things under control and not rely on like the World Health Organization for bailing us out. So that makes us kind of resilient, also makes us very highly sensitive, especially when health related things come up here.
Vigilant.
Yeah.
Whoa, man, you guys are blowing my mind. That's amazing, and congratulations. I'm so happy for you. You can't.
I've seen bootleg shirts at the bootleg market that are just the face of the head of the WHO and just like shitting on it, just like fuck you or something like that. It's like really wild, like how like trickled down. Like it's not even like that's not even like conscious at like the top level. It's just everywhere. We all know that like this guy doesn't give a fuck about us.
Right.
So
I mean,
we're gonna have to take care of that.
this is not something we should spend an enormous amount of time on, but it's such
Sure.
it's no. I mean, not COVID in Taiwan, but like what I'm about to say. It's such an amazing example of throwing into relief how these massive institutions are failing. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, certainly,
Right.
I mean, the government in America just, I mean, nobody wants to talk about this too much, but like, I mean, we dismantled our pandemic response, entity within the federal government before this happened, and then all of the language about it there was really not a lot of discussion about it in January and February, other than that something was happening in China. There was a kind of general anxiety, but there was no vibe of like, be careful, batten the hatches, we're gonna shut down travel. That kind of talk didn't start until March, and then in March and April, it was just kind of like, it's gonna blow over, and it was just like pathetic. But it's really incredible to hear about a place where a sense of like necessity around self-sufficiency and independence informed a really fast, swift, and effective response to this obviously very dangerous and demoralizing condition. This ties into something that I wanna ask you about, and yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit silly, but like, bear with me. There's this kind of cultural trope in America that imagines Asia in general as being full of these kind of future cities. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's this sort of like these cities from the future, like Singapore, and like, I mean, the original OG is like Tokyo, like this kind of hyper futuristic, and then there's a lot of like, we get a lot of news about like facial recognition technology in China, and like this sort of like hyper efficient, hyper futuristic, but then constantly surveilled, like sort of futuristic and dystopian yet convenient kind of situation. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not in any way trying to tout the validity of that perception, but like, is that even something that's real to you, or is that just some weird American stereotype? Like, what is that from your perspective?
I'll start because Alan's trying to take a piece of foam back from my dog that she stole just now.
Success.
Thank you so much. Could you repeat the second half of that question? Because I was also like watching my dog. The second half. So basically, is the impression true, or is
right.
it just like totally
yeah? Like, is that something that you experience, or is that just this kind of made up American media idea or something? Do you understand what I mean? Like, because we just get this kind of messaging, and I'm just wondering, like, is that something that has any real analog in your experience?
I think it depends on the city. I mean, like in Asia, like it ranges, the Asian cities range so much in terms of like technological advances. And I mean, places like Japan and Singapore for sure are really impressive. I think in Taipei, it's a mix. Like, I think in Taipei, it's like a mix between like the hyper traditional and also like the hyper progressive, and they kind of exist and coexist like very harmoniously. And the progressive parts are maybe some like ideologies, and also like technology wise, and like for example transportation or healthcare, or like systems that people live by and have like the convenience and what people have access to in terms of like resources. But there's also like very, very traditional and kind of like very old-timey ways of life that still exist. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I don't think like what always struck me about Taipei, what actually made me want to move here, one of the things was that Taipei never seemed like a city that rebuilt anything. It just builds on top, or builds over, or builds around.
Yeah.
So things that I grew up, I've only been here for 4 years living here, but I've been coming back here since I was 5, so that's like late 80s. And things that I was here for in the 80s are still here. They're still here. They're just like older and like in the back. Like this, we're in the One Pot district now, which is like old Taipei in like the old times. This was like a
This was like
bustling
the center,
epicenter, but now it's like
the red light
the
district.
Bed-Stuy
Yeah.
of Taipei,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But- and you're gonna get this movement, and so communities kind of move back and forth as things fall in and out of limelight. Like things are now in Don's getting too expensive, so I think he's gonna move back out here and stuff like that soon. It's this like kind of ebb and flow. And when you get the sense of technology in Taipei, yeah, you get a lot of new systems, but they're kind of coexisting and sometimes clashing with old systems. And like honestly, things are kind of bootstrapped together.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the charm, right?
Yeah, it's very hacky.
For every like touch screen and like contract tracing app, there's like a bus that is like literally like the bumper's strapped on.
There's like houses made out of tin.
Yeah.
But like next door will be this like, I don't know, Megatron, like like digital screen.
Right.
And like it really depends on what neighborhood you're into.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the ones that like have more access to, like maybe they have a new like digital art center, or like they have a new MRT station opening up. MRT is like the public transport, like the train system, the metro.
Right,
There's like a new station opening up, then like that area will become more gentrified. Yeah, and like basically why the city is built on top of what already exists is it's very, very difficult to tear down buildings that already exist, because that building is probably owned 30 different families, and Taiwan has an aging population because the health, like we have like amazing healthcare, and so the old, if you're a construction company and you're offering like these families like to buy them out, they don't care about the money because they're gonna die in like 5-10 years. So they're like, I'd rather just stay in the home that I grew up in, and this is like my home. So it's just basically impossible to tear down old buildings. So you just have to.
Tradition is like paramount, like more important than any sort of new development. So if you like have like a park you want to like get rid of to make it like a new thing, you're gonna get a lot. It's just like it's not gonna happen. Like they've been building this new stadium in the middle of Taipei for what, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
And that thing has been like over and over again. They keep on asking for more space and stuff, but they have to kind of fight with like 100 years of history.
It's a grueling process.
It's a grueling process, and you're just like. Part of the people like get it done, and part of the people like you should never have built it to begin with. We need this stuff, and it's just like kind of gray area. There's no right and wrong. It's just like it's there.
It's a generational thing. I think it's like the young people versus the old people.
Right.
The progressive versus.
Sorry.
Stadium, right?
We don't need to know.
Okay, just so you know, the internet is breaking up a little bit here, so if I ever jump in and you're still talking, it's because I'm not sure what's going on. But we're basically, I'm getting most of it. But I mean, from hearing you talk, I mean, to me, that sounds like utopian, the kind of inability or difficulty around tearing down old structures. From my perspective is like a value add, because like for example in New York, we're witnessing the constant just erasing of history, basically, because there's nothing. I mean, on the street that I live on, there's these mansions that date back from the early 19th century and early 20th century and late 19th century. And they're these kind of beautiful, majestic old mansions, the kind of thing that nobody would build in New York anymore, And, someone can just buy that plot of land and just get rid of it. I mean, there's like, because, they would do that because they can put an apartment building there with 60 units in it, and that's just a more economic thing for them to do with that land. And, there's community boards who can put up some kind of a resistance to that. In the more affluent areas where the community boards are populated by people who actually have real power and influence, it's harder to do, but still not impossible. Like you still see things like this in the West Village and whatnot, which is one of the most moneyed regions. But like, yeah, I mean, so I've been in New York for 25 years, and since I've been here, I've seen, a dozen or more areas that at one time had a lot of character and a lot of a sense of history, present just become these kind of shopping mall type atmosphere, you know. And it's a shame, you know, it's a shame to realize that something that you hold dear and that you valued about your city either no longer exists, or just the apprehension that this is going to not exist, you know. So that friction around erasing the old in Taipei, to me, sounds like ideal. And do you experience it that way? I mean, is this something that you value about Taipei?
Well, actually, like in response to that, your experience and what you're observing in your city is like, that's actually the reason why I started OOMPH, is because I'm from Vancouver, Canada, but like every summer I usually go back to North America and I visit my friends, and I'll usually make like a couple stops in like SF or LA and New York. And I noticed like every summer when I went back, like all these spaces that I used to hang out with my friend, like hang out with my friends, they would just like close spaces that are, maybe it's like a book shop that also like functions as a gallery space and also functions as like whatever. And so we like really need spaces like that, and that's why I was like, I really want to kind of create a space like that within Taipei, because in Taipei, there's a lot of galleries. Like the art and culture and music scene is thriving, but the underground art and music scene, they don't receive as much like support from the government as like maybe more art. And so it's a massive community effort to keep these kind of spaces going. Like community spaces, DIY art spaces, spaces for artists, by artists, that aren't just like a commercial gallery. Because like, yeah, it takes a lot of help. And I mean, even with help, spaces do close. Like, I mean, last year, Ivy Palace closed, and yeah, places close constantly because it is hard to keep up with rent.
It's funny though, because I feel like closing like America for all the same reason. In America, things close because you're building up, not out, and is now being turned into something else.
Yeah.
And in Taipei, things close because, you know, sometimes the police shut something down because they got too many complaints, or some horrible incident,
things
or
close
like
here a lot.
they ran out of money,
Yeah.
or they ran out of time,
yeah,
or something like that.
Things close here because they couldn't make the rent because like running something that is more for the community, it's not exactly like a moneymaker in the long run. And also noise complaints. So like the kind of the older generation, really things that they don't understand.
It's hard for youth culture to really get a stable footing in Taipei outside of a few distinct regions, which are very commercial and very mainstream.
Okay, so this is really, I'm really glad we're talking about this, and then we'll go from here into the more specific stuff about OOMPH Gallery, which of course we want to talk about. But this is one of the this is one of the like leitmotifs of this podcast, is like, why do spaces open? How do they survive? How can they stay open, and why do they close? You know. So what I'm taking away from what you're saying so far is that. First of all, there's a difference in reason between Taipei and the States, because you're right, absolutely, Alan, that places get pushed out because other things want to happen, right? Like if you're in some shitty warehouse and then CVS wants that piece of land, you're gonna have a really difficult time with your landlord, right? That happens all the time. But then
like the only I've heard of like everybody loving it and it being a great place and everybody wanting it, and then it closing down. That was like underground.
Is what?
Which was shut down by police, basically.
Wait, what was the name of the space?
There's a venue from back like in the late 90s. Oh, you there, Sam? Okay. There was a venue in Taipei called Underground in the late 90s. That's kind of like the successor to it's like the grandfather of kind of what's happening right now, and like kind of everybody in the scene was there, including all the people I work with and most of the people Julia works with and all that. We all kind of like, it was after my time I mean, it was before my time here, but I heard so much about it. And it was near the College Sida, and there's like a night market there too. And that kind of area got kind of like really shut down by the police because of noise and just activity, just too much activity at night. And that was one of the unfortunate casualties of that. They just kind of had to shut it down, had to close it out. And that just became like a couple other venues, which became kind of the current like underground scene right now, where we have like 3 clubs and a couple rock venues and stuff like that, many galleries.
Right. Okay.
But that's the only one that's like we all want it to keep going, but it can't keep going.
Right. Got you. So yeah. Okay. So that's all right. That's one example of that. So, but the other things that I hear you saying is that there is a financial challenge to just keep a space going, which is we all know about that for sure. And then there's also this kind of friction between a more old school kind of conception of social and cultural space, wherein you get things like noise complaints and people just kind of not really liking what you're doing. And then you're also talking about the police. So let's start there with the police, because I always want to hear about how people are being policed. And Alan, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was in Taipei, had a run-in with the police because the cab I was in when I was coming back from that venue that's like completely downstairs. Remember we went to that night? It was like a DJ event at this venue that's completely subterranean. And I was going back to your apartment, and I was in a cab, and the cab was pulled over by the Taiwanese, by the Taipei police, and I was taken out of the cab, and I was questioned about whether or not I had drugs, and it was very intense. I mean, I want to be clear. I didn't feel, they weren't aggressive. I wasn't really ever worried that I was gonna get into some kind of trouble. I didn't have any drugs, I hadn't even really had that much to drink, and I was in a cab, so it wasn't like scary or something, but I did get a sense of like, wow, the police are really out here doing stuff, like, you know what I mean? And so what is the relationship like with the police as far as running a space?
Do you want me to go?
You can go first.
Okay. I think, especially when you were in Taipei last year, that was an election year. And so election year, they really, really ramped up on things like drugs and all sorts of other things. It's kind of like, that's the kind of thing about the police. It's not like, the police, grew up in America. The police in Taipei are nowhere near American level.
They're like supervising safety.
Yeah.
They're not like police in the way you think of police.
And the police will help you if you like need help.
Because that's what they're supposed to do.
But
they help citizens.
But they're annoying. But they're annoying.
Right.
Because they will work for, they are there to pick up the phone when your old neighbor calls, and they're gonna come. I think that we don't want to be here, but we have to be here.
They're so nice though about it. They're just like, hey, sorry to bother you guys. We got some noise complaints. You guys can keep going. Everything's all good. Like, sorry to intrude on your event. But just like, if you can like get your guests to come inside, like, so sorry, like, 不好意思, which means basically like please excuse us. Yeah. Please excuse the
sorry
intrusion.
To bother you.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
They're so sweet, and like they're just there to help. Honestly, the police here are just there to assist. I'm pretty on the left when it comes to the policing and stuff. So, Taiwan's still a capitalist society, and they're still protecting capital more than people. But, if you lose your wallet, they'll help you get it. They won't just be like, no, we don't care, right?
Right.
That's nice. That's super nice, actually.
Man, you guys just keep blowing my mind here, man. Jesus Christ, man. It's funny because I talked to Tim DeWitt. We have a mutual friend, Tim DeWitt, Dutchy Germ, and I mean he's so into Taipei. You know what I mean? This guy. Somebody should pay this guy money because he is like, he loves Taipei, it's interesting. I was there for a few days and I loved it too. But hearing more about what you're describing, it really is pretty astonishing. Let's say, because the venue that I run, I actually have a very very good relationship with the police who police this area. Like,
Sure.
I know them. I know the lieutenant who's like, he's kind of in charge of the beat cops who come out and whatnot. I know him. I have a great relationship with him. I've run 3 spaces in this precinct. So I've been working with this guy for a long time. He doesn't bother me. The police don't bother us. They don't come to, and that's one of the things about my venue, Hollow, that I think has allowed us to be a success, is that there's never been a story about Hollow where something was going on and then all of a sudden there were 6 police with flashlights in the venue and, you know, that kind of thing. Even though venues really can't do anything about it, it's not really their fault. You know, I mean, sometimes it is, but like, generally the police are out there looking for this kind of stuff. But if that kind of thing starts to happen at your club, even though people know it's not really your fault, it's gonna give your club a bad reputation and people are gonna feel like, well, I don't know if I wanna do my thing there because it might get shut down, or people just feel, people are afraid of the police. People are literally just scared. And so they don't wanna go to a space where they feel like they're gonna end up in proximity with the police. Here's what I'm driving at. I don't have those problems, but the perception around the police in New York and in America writ large, especially in progressive, creative communities, is so negative for good reason that I wouldn't even, like what you, Julia, when you were saying, you were like, the police are so nice. Yeah. It's like, I wouldn't even say that. Even if they are nice, I wouldn't even go say that to somebody because I'm so hyper aware of what a bad experience the police are for so many people, that for me to say I have a good relationship with the police is almost like insensitive to other people's experience. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, that's how bad it is. And it's like, it's wild. And so it's completely like, I feel like I'm dreaming when I hear you talk about that kind of a relationship with the police. Like, I mean, and I have run a bunch of things where the police have shut them down and I've had those kinds of interactions with the police. The idea that the police would come and be like, sorry to bother you is like, it's just fucking crazy, man. I'm so glad we talked about that though, just because I think it's a fascinating thing for just anybody to hear in America. That kind of relationship even could exist, right? Is something that is just never even really represented.
That's like the purpose of police. I just think it's like really ironic because when I tell friends back home about people's relationship with police and how it is like, in most parts of the world, they're just like so surprised. And in my mind, I'm just like, but that's the whole point of police. They're supposed to help the citizens. You know, like they're like when I first moved here, like I always knew I could count on the police to give me directions, they'll offer to take me to where I need to go. Like so nice. They're like friends of the people.
But at the same time, they'll do bullshit if the government wants them to do bullshit. And that's like why you got pulled over and why they'll amp up their things on clubs, like they'll go raid more clubs. And honestly, like, the higher you get up the totem pole as far as like the amount of money you're making or how successful your business is, especially when it comes to nightlife, the more targeted you get by them.
Right.
And there's definitely like an ecosystem of paying people off to be less targeted or getting protection from other non-official sources against disruption from the police.
Right.
But I can't personally because I don't own a club, but hearsay is that some clubs pay better than others and some clubs get raided more than others.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a classic. It's like a very, very old tradition of paying off authority.
Money and power wants your shit to close, you will probably get closed.
Right. Well, yeah, it's the same here. But you know what's an interesting thing, and then let's get into OOMPH Gallery because I could just go on about this all day. But like an interesting thing about New York is that kind of corruption really doesn't exist. Like the corruption in New York is at a very high level. It's right. Like if I could, I've been in a million situations where if I could give a cop $200 and be like, peace, thanks for your work, oh my God, that would be incredible. They don't do that, man. They don't like. At some point, there was a very, very serious crackdown on that kind of low-level corruption, like government officials being paid off and stuff, and people will not take bribes. People won't even take gifts. Like, for example, the garbage men, the people who pick up our garbage, we used to give them a gift on Christmas, right? So if it's like we know like the day that they're going to pick up the garbage that's closest to Christmas, I would run out and give them an envelope. Just thanks for your work, just like a tip. You know what I mean? And they're like, I can't accept that. Like garbage men. Do you know what I mean? It's like what possible objective could I be trying to achieve here? You know what I mean? But it's like it's very, very like you just don't find that in New York. What people do in New York is they hire off-duty police officers to work security for their venue, and then supposedly when the police come, if the person who's working is an off-duty police officer, they show the police their badge, and then the police will kind of leave them alone. That's like as close as you get to that type of corruption. Anyhow, so Julia, guys, thank you for the overview. I know this is maybe not exactly like what we imagined we were going to be talking about, but this is fascinating. But let's talk about OOMPH Gallery. Tell us about your program, what your just the emphasis is that you place on different kinds of work, what you have coming up, what you've done.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we started about 3.5 years ago. And I mentioned previously that it was birthed through the desire of wanting to create space for artists, by artists, for the community, by the community. Because there are so many commercial galleries and art type of events put on that are like government approved or just for commercial purposes. And there's just not enough spaces for young artists, for artists that are experimenting, or for the community, and where people can just come get together, exchange, and share ideas and form those connections, possibly collaborate, possibly ignite something like new possibilities. And so the programming is basically like there's one exhibition a month, and within that exhibition period, we organize like a comprehensive program of different events that relate, and the content of the events, they relate to the exhibition theme. So visitors can actually experience the exhibition through different mediums. So it might be like music, there might be a concert one weekend that maybe ties in with either the feeling of the exhibit, or it might be like actual content. And then the next might be like a DIY workshop. Then there's probably like some artist talks or conceptual parties, stuff like that. Because we also encourage the artists to collaborate with other creatives so that they can expand their, like they can explore other mediums and start to expand as well their body of work. And on top of that, we also organize art and music festivals. So not only are we a space, but we also collaborate with other spaces and other organizations. So Urban Nomad, which is actually a film festival, an indie film festival, like the opening party started turning into this music festival, which after a couple years, that was the one that we invited you to. And yeah, Acid Lab is another one we collaborate with often, which is this like shared studio of like different craftspeople. So they're actually like a space that used to be a noodle factory, and they renovated so that it's like there's like 6 different studios within the space, and they'll have like markets and exhibitions and events. And so we often put on festivals with them. Like for example, on New Year's, we're doing this like art party that's kind of like a nuit blanche structure. So it's like DJ performances and performance art and art installations. Those 3 main elements, as well as like a market, art market, and experiences like booths and live art. That one's going to take place on the same venue that you went to, which is Tiger Mountain. It's this like outdoor music venue. It's like 15-minute walk from the nearest metro station, but you just walk up the mountain basically, and so you're like in the middle of the jungle, and that's at this abandoned temple. So the temple being kind of like the main focus. The theme is Bwapwe, which is like Taiwanese divination blocks. So when you go to temples, so in Taipei, in Taiwan, there's temples everywhere. They're kind of these like local hubs. They're almost like community centers. When you go to the temple, there's a couple things you can do at them. One is you can ask the gods like questions regarding like where you're, like what they would suggest you do in your life. Like let's say you're asking like, oh, should I date this guy that I met, or oh, should I open this business that I'm thinking of opening? And you can throw down the blocks, and depending on how the 2 blocks fall, it can either mean yes, no, or the gods are laughing at you, which means ask again. So that's kind of like the theme. And yeah, so like stuff like that, like a lot of conceptual festivals and parties, and because we want to explore like these topics, different topics, but with like in really fun ways. We want to like create like lasting memories and stuff that other people haven't seen before, because if it's already been done, we kind of like don't want to do it, because like what's the point? So we're always doing like experimental stuff, and we kind of focus more on like experimental and emerging artists, because there's less of a space for that, for those kinds of artists and that kind of art at other like commercial galleries. So, you know, like we've set fireworks off in the gallery before. Like we usually paint the gallery once a month and just completely transform the space. And that's kind of what sets us apart, because we are like underground, literally and metaphorically. So there's kind of like no rules. We're in the basement of a hair salon. So it's kind of like you have to like find your way there. And like usually people are a little confused when they come in. It's like you have to find the stairs. And yeah, like I think what kind of sets us apart is like we're trying to create a place and a platform for those that are kind of doing things a little outside of the box, and be able to like support that and nourish that, and also connect like the creatives within Taipei, within Taiwan, and also create a bridge between the international crowd and also the local crowd for like ideally these like hybrids of like new creations from the the intersection of the cultures, of different cultures.
Wow. Yeah, I think about so much when I hear you talk about this. Firstly, I have like really crazy basement karma, like in the sense that my venue is in a basement, and every venue that I have invited to be on this podcast so far is in a basement. And in every case, I did not know they were in a basement. I did not reach out to them because they're in a basement. Like I had no idea OOMPH Gallery was in a basement. Last week I had Ibrida Collective from Udine, Italy on, and their first venue was in a basement. And the other venues that I've had on are 2 venues from Jerusalem, both in basements. Both did not know that ahead of time. So I'm just some kind of troll or something. Like I like an actual troll, not an internet troll, but like I just like I'm attracted to basements somehow.
Literal underground.
Yeah. Literal underground. So then something else that really, I mean, you talked a lot about the support of the community, and I want to get to that because that's such important work and so interesting. And as I do these podcasts and I interview more people who are doing that work, it's something that's really valuable for me about doing this is that I actually become more and more engaged by it and appreciative of how important that is. So that's fascinating and cool. But something that you said that really just again blew my mind is the presence of the temples and the abandoned temple. It's not called Tiger Mountain, is it? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's Tiger Mountain.
Yeah, okay. And you're talking about this custom of asking the gods, and this is connected to this kind of community center practice of the temples and of this branch of spirituality or religious or metaphysical practice of some kind. And it was really striking to me. It really threw into relief for me how absent that type of dialogue is in America, in the sense that the equivalent would be if we had more shows in churches, which we do. Churches are purposed for concert presentation. That is something that happens. But what never happens is any kind of actual connection with what the church is actually for. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like if a concert presenter in the States gets access to the basement of a church and presents a concert, which, as I said, does happen. That's not actually that uncommon. we would never have some kind of relationship with like the pastor or something where we go and we participate in transubstantiation or like some religious practice or even the most superficial type of engagement with Christianity would never emerge in that setting, so it's really, and this is something that we all spoke about before the episode, that the more present quality of Taiwan's cultural legacy in that way is a real standout when thinking about culture organization. But I just wanted to highlight that. But let's come back to that whole thing. Let's talk about that later in the episode, about just the presence of temples and processions and whatnot, because that kind of deserves its own section. But something that I'm wondering about, and this also ties in with Alan's work, is the work that you're doing with the communities in Taiwan at OOMPH Gallery. It sounds like it's very focused on local communities, and I'm wondering, but perhaps not, because I've seen a lot of your materials, and I do see that you have people from all over the place. So I'm wondering about that like confluence of people, artists from your local communities, and then people coming to Taipei from the outside, and how that gets integrated, and how that propagates what you're doing, and how much of that is part of your mission, and what's that like?
So ideally, like, I would like the crowd to that comes to OOMPH to be about like 50-50, like international and local, because like I am Taiwanese, but I'm also Canadian, and I just think that like being able to merge the two differing perspectives and cultures, it can birth like something totally new and unseen before. That is like really exciting. That like takes elements from different backgrounds, and so I really hope I really try to structure it so that it's friendly to both the international and local crowd, so that, because I am also bilingual, so that like it creates reads like an environment that is friendly to both, and also encourages interaction and collaborations between both. So I think of OOMPH as like kind of this grounds for connecting people, and for exchanging ideas, and to be also to see things that you haven't seen before. So if we have like performers visiting from like Hanoi or from Puerto Rico, like I will put an extra effort to invite more of the local community, because I want them to see something that they otherwise maybe have never seen in Taiwan before. And then hopefully that'll spark new ideas for them that they can bring into their own work as creatives or their professions. So it is really, really important to me to like bridge that cultural gap. I find that it's definitely the goal, but in reality, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, because even if the people themselves aren't unfriendly, like your linguistic ability is it provides like very real limitations, because even if you wanted to converse with someone in Mandarin, if you as an English speaker, you can't, unless like, and so sometimes people are just a little bit shy about like interacting. And so something that I think organizers such as like me and Alan, we try to do, because I know Alan also like really emphasizes and cares a lot about like the local community and being open and accessible to them, is that like sometimes an event will be deemed as like a local event, or it's a foreigner event, if like it tilts the attendees like tilt more towards one side, or maybe the performers tilt more towards one side. And so that's kind of a battle that we constantly have to fight, to try to get like equal representation. We try to have everything bilingual. Like we're kind of lucky.
A lot of it's messaging,
Yeah, a lot of it's messaging.
It's just like the simple, like
it.
what font is bigger on the flyer.
Yeah.
Like if the English name for your event is bigger, or do you have an English name for your event?
Yeah. It's a lot about like that, and then that kind of like cues viewers and outsiders considering the project to like, they can determine like, oh, what do they think this, what kind of crowd do they think this is like aimed for. But I think like we're also really lucky in Taiwan that like Taiwan really wants to be a very like international country. Like they want to be able to participate on a global stage. And so ever since like kindergarten, everybody has to learn English. And so like most people are bilingual to a degree, even the local community. Some local people, like their English is like perfect. And like, where did you grow up? They're like, here. And so it's not as hard as like maybe if you were to go to like, I don't know, a lot of countries, you know, if they didn't predominantly speak English, like they probably don't really speak English at all. So like here, everything's like, a lot of things are in English and Chinese. So when you like go to street signs are in both languages, like the menus are in both languages. So we have like, it's much easier to bridge that gap here than it would be in other countries.
Right. So, and this ties really neatly in with Alan's work, but I want to shine a brighter light on this aspect of what you're doing. So well, two questions. One, how fluid is the flow of people into Taipei from the outside? Is that something that you're trying to ramp up and make happen more? Or is it already just like a stop on people's way? Like,
well,
This year's been bad.
this year's been bad. In general, I think about like officially 5% of the population are expats, but that's just officially, that's the people that are registered to be here. Because it's very easy to stay here illegally, like incredibly. Basically, anyone that coming here basically gets a 3-month landing visa, visitor's visa. And then all you have to do to renew that is just leave and come back in, and you can just do that indefinitely, and no one cares.
I've known people who've been very involved in the art scene here who've done that for 10 years and maybe, recently got some sort of permanent residence. And there's definitely people who are still on those visas. And actually, because of the COVID situation, they've just, a lot of them have just been extended. Like, it's basically indefinite extension for anybody who's stuck here.
So basically, Taiwan, they've extended visitors' visas so that there will be no repercussions for overstaying their visa, because they don't want to cause mass migration, which could increase COVID rates.
And basically, the immigration office was getting swamped with the entire expat community just being like, you can't send me to Italy, back to Italy, like everybody's dying.
Yeah.
You can't send me, I have nowhere to live there.
Yeah, so I guess back to your question, is it easy? What's the expat community like? It's super easy to stay here, and because Taiwan is so awesome, and we're not, I don't just say any country is awesome, and I'm not saying it because I live here, but I live here because it's awesome. Most people here, they didn't plan on staying this long, but it's just a really easy place to stick around for much longer than planned, because it's just so safe and comfortable, and it's just really good for living.
It can get a little the Odyssey, or a little Lotus eatery, if that makes any sense.
Oh, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
You can get trapped here in how comfortable.
Yeah, right. Totally.
You can lose years off your life. You can be I'm gonna come here for a visit and check it out, and then suddenly
be here for 3 months.
Suddenly it's 8 years later, and you still haven't done very much. You've been really happy for 8 years.
Yeah. But there is that aspect, but another aspect is that not a lot of people know about Taiwan. People who do happen to come by, if they found out about Taiwan somehow, they do end up sticking around for a long time. But it's hard to kind of find out about Taiwan in the first place, because when I first moved here, all my friends were like, so how's Thailand? I'm I'm in a totally different country, because no one's really heard of it, and there's kind of a reason for that. There are outside forces trying to keep Taiwan on the down low, and so I wish more people knew about how awesome it was, because I think Taiwan is very welcoming to outsiders, newcomers, injecting new energy here. But Yeah.
But is like, I guess what I'm trying to find out, that's informative about the expat community and all of those policies, where you're continuing on your mind blowing tour here. But are you guys interested in amping up the flow of people who are just on tour or something, or a visual artist who would think of Taiwan as a place to have a show, like that come in from the outside? Like, what is that flow like into the country or the city? Not to stay, but just to go present. You know, is that something that you're trying to increase, or is there already like a very sufficient amount of that, or where does that stand?
Yeah, I'll let Alan answer that one because I think we share very similar like positions on that.
So what I was noticing even before, I mean, even like after I moved here, was that I think Taiwan is a spot to come to as far as like an underground artist or, someone looking for someone who's like, a lot of like, I think for predominantly most of the modern underground art, I guess, like the places to go to in Asia are like Japan, number one, Korea, maybe, and then like China, probably Hong Kong, China. Taiwan really hasn't been on that list until like recently. I've heard more people talk about Taiwan as like a destination. Like I gotta go there. I've been hearing so much good things about there, and I think that's increased with the amount of people who. I think Taiwan, especially in the '90s and early thousands, was more of like a Thailand Vietnam situation. Where it was kind of like a vacation like expat stop, pretty quiet and parochial. And now what we're getting is a lot more like people like approaching it like from academia, from actual residency, engaging with art, trying to get stuff done, writing movies, filming movies, looking to do something in kind of this like, I wouldn't say elevated cultural sense than just like a long vacation. And I think with that, you're getting a lot of people who can speak with some authority on like a cultural aspect, going back to America, going back to Europe, telling people, oh, I did 6 months in Taiwan, it was great. The art community there is so cool.
Right.
Because now there's a lot of people like touring, and when people hit me up to tour Asia, they go like, oh, I really want to come to Taipei. How is it over there? I'm like, oh, it's great. Like, yeah, I heard so much from my friends. I have no idea what it's like, but I just heard I have to go. So also what I've done, personally, when people ask me, it's like I try to be an advocate for like how like, but in a real sense, how dynamic, but how much also Taiwan has to go, how much more it has to go to like get to a level of like Japan or Korea or China. But that's always prefaced with a sense of opportunity versus like idleness. Like there's a lot of opportunity here to like get a lot of things going.
Right.
And I would love to see more people on the regular come through and look for more opportunities to be here and do their art or showcase their art in a tour or residency type situation.
Yeah, I think as like art and culture facilitators, like that is the dream to just put somewhere that we love on the map and also invite more talent to come through and cross-pollinate and have there be more exchange and interaction.
Because when you look at the financials of coming to Taiwan, if you're like a tour manager or a tour agent and you're looking at all your offers, Taiwan is never going to be at the top of this. Honestly, like the economy here is like not as good, not as robust as China or Japan or Korea. You aren't going to be making your top fee of the show in Taiwan.
Right, of course.
But if you it's going to be, you could spend a lot of time. You could like really, it's going to be one of the most comfortable spots. It'll probably be one of the most like, and I think the novelty of a lot of artists coming here is still new to the Taiwanese people.
Right.
And so you have a lot of opportunity to like really build kind of a second home for you, maybe even. It's for every 10 or 15 artists you're gonna get a 10 who just falls in love with it like right away, right? I don't think Tim could have happened like 5 years ago.
Right.
Bring it out here.
Something that I notice, I mean, this also may just be me, and this isn't even a question. I'm just going to throw this idea out there and, do with it what you will. But something that I notice worldwide is that life in the major cultural hubs is getting harder and harder. And then at the same time, there's this like proliferation of like quote unquote opportunity. And yet there's also this kind of diluting of what that means happening. Like,
Sure.
like if you look at New York City from when I moved here versus now, like when I moved here, of course, there's this sense of New York City that it's this land of opportunity. You know, everything was here. You know, it was like wild, right? But there was still this feeling as an artist that like opportunity was kind of scarce. Like it was hard to get a show. There was lots of opportunity there, but it was hard to access it. It's like you had to work, you had to put in time. You know, you had to go to like 100 shows to get asked to play a show. You know what I mean? And now New York is so saturated with venues and internet radio stations and labels and management companies and brands and creative agencies that like basically, Alan, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Every artist, it's like, oh, this creative agency is managing me, and I'm on this label, and I've got my radio show on this thing, and I have a residency at this club. Even artists, yeah, and even artists that have been doing what they've been doing for like under a year have like management and booking representation and a label and a residency and a show and a da-da-da. Do you know what I mean? And it's like the sense that there's just this ability to just hook that up, like structurally, but then because there's been this massive proliferation of those kinds of entities, what does that mean even really, right? Because basically everybody has that, and if they don't, they just start their own thing, right? And so this process is going on alongside this process in all of the major cultural arteries of life becoming harder, things becoming more expensive, but wages not increasing, right? So you have this kind of less meaningful cultural opportunity, though lots of it, and then a more difficult life. And all of my best experiences on the road are in the non-major markets, 100% of the time. And also this goes out to audience too, because this incredible availability of content affects audiences. Like when you go and you play Berlin and you play London and you play New York, I'm gonna leave Tokyo out of it because Tokyo audiences are incredible actually. But
Tokyo's a strange one like that. Tokyo's a very strange one like that.
Yeah, no, they're into it. But like there is this kind of like malaise, you know. These people are like every night of the week, they're like, well, what am I gonna do tonight? Am I gonna go see Laurel Halo or Dan Deacon or One O Tricks Point Never, or go to this film festival or this art opening? Or there's so many options, that like showing up at one of these things is like, okay, I guess I'll go to this one. They're just kind of like, they don't even care. Do you know what I mean? It's like, whereas if you're playing like Warsaw or even a minor city in Poland, like Gdansk or Wrocław or something, people are amped, man. Do you know what I mean? People are freaking ready. They're like pumped that you're there. They're putting in the time. The spot is sick. Everybody's psyched. They want to go out to dinner and hang, and it's like dope. It's like this really true experience of culture and community, and has this and is imbued with this spirit of like hope and optimism and faith in this kind of work of like propagating culture. And I experienced that in Taiwan. I experienced it in Mexico, and I guess I'm just saying all of this to say that in my perception, which of course is totally limited, I'm just a single person, I have this experience over and over again where maybe you're not getting the biggest fee, although it is relevant to point out that it's cheaper to fly. It's cheaper to fly somewhere in China and then to Taipei and then to Japan than it is to fly to Japan. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you're not going to get your biggest fee, but you're going to get your best experience at these markets where people are doing the kind of work that you guys are doing, and where there's a sense of potential. Whereas let's use dopamine as like an analogy. Like in these major markets, people's dopamine is just tapped out. It's like they just can't get excited anymore because it's just fucking saturated. Anyways, that honestly is just me popping off. So thank you for listening to my speech about that. But Alan, tell us about I'm sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to add on to your point. I think Taipei is just kind of like basically on the cusp of like, it's like, emerging from that kind of parochial townness, and kind of the cultural intelligence of Taiwan, both local and expat, is like so high, so high. People are so smart here,
Right.
and it's just like so ready for just more, and it's just hard for people. I think the hardest thing is for people to understand where that comes from or how they make. Most of the conversations I have with like local musicians and local artists, it's just like, what does a manager do? What does a native do? What does this mean? What does that mean? How do I get noticed here? How do I get noticed there? They're just ready for like a lot of that infrastructure to come in. But like you said, if you do it the wrong way, or if you do it in weird, oversaturated ways, it gets really awful for everybody. If you just build it too much, it just becomes meaningless. So I think the opportunity, when I say opportunity, I kind of think that what it means in my most like optimistic sense is that we can build it the right way. Right? We can where it works for the artists, where it works for Taiwan versus for feeding Taiwanese art culture to a machine that will just chew it up and spit it out, right?
Right. Yeah.
We don't want to become. We understand what happened to like Japanese culture and like how it got super commercialized and kind of like almost taken away
And
we understand
fetishized.
Right.
Yeah.
And like Taiwan is fiercely protective and like very like adoptive of its own culture and identity that I don't think it would happen in the same way, or at least they wouldn't let it happen without like some sort of fight.
Yeah, like I think there's like a massive thirst and desire for more, and like massive excitement, and because like right now it is this kind of pivotal moment where stores are starting to open. I mean, even the past couple years, like things are changing so fast. Like every year, there's so much more going on than the last. Like even since Alan got here like 4 years ago, so much has changed. Even when I got here, like so much has changed, and I've been here for like 8 years. It's really night and day because I remember when I got here, there was like one club for like alternative music, and now it's just like there's like a lot of competition and so many options. And I think like the people like you mentioned, that people are like super cultured here and like really like well informed.
People are so aware.
Yeah, and so like because of that, I think like everyone who is involved in the art and culture and music scene, like they what's cool is that like whatever we're doing right now, it actually shapes the future of the scene here because we are on the cusp. Like it's not oversaturated yet. Like everyone that is a player within the scene right now actually it can influence it in a way, and it changes very fast. And so that's like what's exciting. So like what like people like us like what we're aware of that kind of phenomenon occurring back home or like in places that we visit. And so we're like as we're shaping the scene, we're like being very careful as to we're treading carefully even though we want to get there, but we're like doing it like very like calculative. We're very calculative in what kind of moves we make, what kind of new spaces or what kind of new organizations are popping up because like we're taking care in this process.
That's so important, and I'm so happy to hear you say that. And it also ties back into what you were saying earlier about the presentation of the bills as being like local or international, or like doing careful messaging around that so that both communities feel invited into the space. Something that brings up for me about how this process, I think, has become kind of derailed in New York and it's like super bloated, is that an important fact in New York that people lose sight of is that New York is the proud home of a large number of super important, I'm just going to talk about music, but of course this extends to visual arts, right? Artist communities, right, that have created work that really have changed the world. You know what I mean? And those, when you look at those communities, they were just New Yorkers. You know what I mean? Like whether you're talking about disco or hip hop or punk or certain lanes of techno and house, right? These are New Yorkers organizing events for New Yorkers with other New Yorkers, right? And Alan as a booker, and we're gonna move on and talk about that next. But something that I'm sure you're increasingly aware of is that like if you're a presenter in New York City and you've got a night, you've got a party, right, that you do once a month or once every other month or quarterly or whatever, right? There's this very prevailing attitude that unless you're flying somebody in from somewhere, your party is not really going to hit. It's not really going to compete. Like your headliner, or you're at least the person who plays second to last, almost has to be flown in, or else you don't really have a competitive lineup, which is a really weird development when you consider that New York has such a strong history of defining itself in terms of itself. You follow what I'm saying?
Totally.
And so to arrive at this place culturally where you can't really compete unless you're contextualizing what you do here in New York in terms of something from outside of New York, is something that I think all of us here in New York should have a lot of, in a sense, like a healthy, like positive kind of skepticism around, or at least critical engagement with. And like a lot of the work that I've done at the venue has been to sort of say, the most exotic thing to present to New Yorkers right now is just New York. Do you know what I mean? Like, because what also happens, and this ties into these minor markets that we're talking about, is that in like something I noticed when I played Urban Nomad, right? Like I play like difficult listening, like misanthropic free jazz saxophone related music, you know what I mean? And like if you go play like Berlin or London, if you're not playing one of like the places with the presenter who presents that music, it's not gonna work. It's just, people are gonna be like, I didn't come to hear this. You follow what I'm saying? When you play in smaller cities, like when I played Urban Nomad, like I'm sure the people in that room, and the room was full, it was cool, they're not just at home listening to Anthony Braxton, they're just down to check it out. Do you know what I mean? They're just like, oh, well, why not? Why wouldn't I check this out? You know what I mean? This isn't something that I get to see every day. I'm gonna come check this out. So in the more major markets, you have this thing where artists and like kinds of art and work gets siloed. You see, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, is like segregated, right? So like, and ultimately, that's bad for artists, right? Like, because if like, it's a much better thing for me as an artist to go play for a bunch of people who just wouldn't necessarily have ever heard about me or even like what I do, like in general, right? That's a better, more productive engagement than plugging into this hyper dialed in scene with people who probably already know about it, you know? But that is like a trait of the more dominant markets. When you're in a more dominant market, there's enough people to have everybody separate out into their lane and stay in their lane. And that like contributes. But then when you combine that with what I'm describing going on in New York with every major play needing to also include somebody from outside of New York, you're kind of eroding your internal community and eroding the stature of your city at the same time. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, like again, I'm just spouting off, but like you guys have an amazing thing going on, and it's really inspiring to hear you talk about it. But let's continue this, and at the same time pivot. And Alan, I'm sure you can tie a lot of what we're talking about into your practice as a booker for Awesome Agency and your party customs. I mean, all of this is kind of right in that wheelhouse.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like to speak specifically to what you just said, I think Taiwan has like a very healthy hometown appreciation. Like the local shows, the biggest bands here who play their local shows, those shows sell out real quick. Like they don't have any problem. Like the local scene, as far as like who are the real players right now in the scene, they do very well. When like Susing, I did an interview in Tank Magazine about Taipei a little bit, and they were talking specifically about the night Susing, who's a Taiwan, has Taiwan heritage. He's Malaysian, lives in Shanghai, splits time in Taiwan, helps out at Final a lot. He played Final and recorded the mix and put it in RA, and they were talking about like that mix, and I was talking, yeah, so whenever Susing plays Taipei, he gets a really great crowd. You get a lot of people we don't see normally at Final because he's the hometown hero. And same thing with like Sunset Roller Coaster and Joan Baba, and even like now you'll see Montong and Sonia, Coco. They'll get a lot of love from the hometown. So local scene we're almost kind of working the opposite thing. I mean, definitely when COVID wasn't around, there was definitely a lot of push to have international artists come in as a pool. But I think that's like not necessarily a requirement, but it's just another way to go toe to toe against, I guess, like the top earners in like the Taiwan local sphere. I don't know. It's like one of the ways to do it. And I think because of COVID, just people have to get a lot more inventive now in Taipei about like how to structure local events to make them not seem like the same old lineups over and over again. And so you get a lot of gimmicks, a lot of imagery, a lot of design, a lot of kind of combinations of weird parties, and that's kind of like why I've slowed down a bit during COVID is because I don't think I can do a local party better than a lot of these kids can because I'm not a local, right? I'm really refreshed. I look the part, but I didn't go to high school with all these kids. I didn't go to elementary school. They all went to elementary school and high school together. So they're very integrated, so they can throw their local party. So I need to come up with something like interesting, I think, or at least perspective-wise, in order to really be passionate about an event at this point. Before then, like my whole niche, I felt like was kind of putting underground international artists and local artists like in the best place to succeed together. And I don't want it to do that, but also create connections outside of just playing a show together that would kind of last. If I know a guy in the local scene really loves an artist, and we can put them together in the same room and provide some sort of like platform medium for communication. Maybe they can collaborate, and then we can get their music, our Taiwanese artist music in Japan or in America, or like that kind of thing. So that's like my idea is like putting people together and putting kind of big things in small rooms and seeing kind of like how those particles kind of bash against each other and seeing what comes out of it. And I mean, that was going back all the way to the Seattle days, again, bringing in like Asian artists and local artists together and just like kind of like seeing what we could do, what we could generate that would be interesting and kind of unique. Yeah.
Oh man, I had a question jumped into my mind that has now escaped. Wait a minute, I'm gonna give it 5 seconds and see if it comes back.
Okay.
Well, now it's okay. I have another one, anyways. Something that I read about in a discussion of your work, specifically the customs party, was the I guess problem or issue around the underrepresentation of Asian artists in dance music. Is something that you were talking about, and maybe this extends more broadly into all kinds of artists. But how does an initiative around that play into your work?
I think that view, which I mean, that article came out, and that view came out of my time in America, and things around like your perspective of race, I guess, and representation change a lot when you like move out here. I'm not gonna say like my perspective then was wrong in any sort, but I think the need for just representation is like a little naive and just like more what would be the word? More understanding, I guess, or more like I think the problem is not Asian artists. I probably wrote about that in the article, but it's not like Asian artists aren't doing enough to get recognized. I think there's a lot of amazing contemporary art coming from Asia and coming from Asian diaspora that is like should be merited, should be worth mentioning over and over and over again. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening out of the sight of a lot of Western journalism because there's just not enough access or not enough care to like go and discover that stuff.
Right.
I don't know about there.
Yeah.
But from my exposure coming from, primarily interested in art coming from Asian diaspora and Eastern Asian music and culture and underground culture, is that there's just so much. There's so much. I'm learning more every day. I'm almost 40 years old and I'm still running into bands and things that I'm hearing from 10, 20, 30 years ago that are just like amazing and blowing my mind.
Right.
And it's like, there's no resources to learn about that other than my own research or some one kid on the internet who's just obsessed with that thing. I'm just like reading everything he wrote down, you know?
Yeah, for
And so-
sure. I mean, something that like working as a curator in New York City and like a big kind of, I mean, this is how we met really, because this is how I met Leo and therefore how I met you.
Right.
Is maintaining an awareness of communities doing forward-thinking work from distant places, maybe sometimes places that from a kind of normative perspective would be like surprising. Like a good example would be like Gom music, right, from South Africa. It's like, it's this hyper futuristic, cryptic sounding music, and nobody in my situation like generally is aware of what's happening there, right? So then you hear this music and it blows your mind, right? So something, and here's something that I notice, like when a community like that, or like when Non first hit, that had this kind of African diasporic but sort of diffuse kind of attitude about curating that label, or when NAFI hit, like, you know, Mexican producers and DJs making this like very cryptic, very urban kind of futuristic production sounds and whatnot. These things had the potential to catch on like wildfire. Do you know what I mean? It just became this like, everybody had to just be down with this, and you were booking these DJs and flying these people here. It just had this kind of like bottle rocket kind of quality. Now, I had this moment where I became aware of do hits, and I was like, this is gonna be one of those things. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I'm gonna book this. People are gonna find out. It's gonna be awesome. And it didn't happen in the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I've also seen that in other scenes where like I thought that like Bodots from the Philippines would blow up as a production style, and
I love Budots,
yeah,
but I can see why.
nobody knows about that, man. Like you're literally the only person I've ever brought that up to that's been.
Oh, you need to talk to Similar Objects from Manila, because he has like a Budots mix series and it's great.
Oh, sick. Okay, I am gonna check that out. But I think here's what I'm driving at. I think that there's this generally writ large, there's this kind of fetishization in the West in progressive communities of otherness. Any type of especially along racial, ethnic, religious lines, otherness, which then of course becomes some kind of exoticism, is sort of fetishized, right? But then there are other forces driving, sort of steering the fetishization that cause the sort of gears of the culture machine to turn less vigorously when you have something like Do Hits, right? It had all of the qualities that Non or NAFI had. Do you know what I mean? Super forward-thinking production style, totally different. Didn't sound like it was biting anything. Like it was just its own thing, you know. And it's coming from China, which is like that's new, you know, more or less. You know what I mean? But I think that like Americans, to Americans, Asians doing great, amazing shit is like not news. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's like that thing of like, oh my God, I've got to have this, doesn't kick in or something. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I'm not trying to say that it's like that across the board or something, but I'm just, but in terms of this thing of advancing the interests of those artists in the broader context of the culture sphere, I wonder what you think about that, because like to me, the Do Hits thing not achieving that height that like NAFI or Non achieved, it surprised me. I was like, what is this shit is dope. Like why do you know what I mean? Why it got some shine, you know, people found out about it. But like, I mean, you remember when, you know, when Chino Amobi was on the front of the wire, it was like if you didn't have a Non artist at your festival, you weren't even really in business. It just got to this level. You know what I mean?
Right, 100%. Like there is some sort of trepidation, I think, for a lot of the world, and when I say the world, I mean Western, kind of even the underground music machination, kind of refraining to really approach it from a really like genuine and like invested way. And I think you see that same thing with like, honestly, like with like Food Man's work and stuff, right? Like everybody loves Food Man.
Right.
No one books Food Man.
Right.
Right? Right? Right?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Right. Why? Why? Is it his fault? Is it not a manager? I know Food Man very personally. He's a super nice guy. It's not like his personal problem. Is there a language barrier? Maybe. He has Orange Milk working with it though. He has like an English language manager who like educated in London. There's just, it's just like you can say like, oh, he's just way too experimental. But is he more experimental than like Safanan or Gom, like when we first were hearing it? I don't know.
No.
So there's like a lot of skepticism on my part into like how invested or how energetically people pursue these things that they profess to like a lot. And like, so what can I do about that? I can't just like smash the whole system. But what I can do is like work on my end to kind of like proliferate the cool things and the interesting things I think that are happening out here to the top, as far as like people who will listen to me, and just like make, it helps to, there's so much good stuff. It's hard to be wrong out here.
Right.
So like there's a lot of interesting stuff, and I think a lot of people are getting into that. I think a lot of experimental art music is looking towards like the Shanghai scene or the Shenzhen scene, which are amazing. Like there's so much stuff happening out there. And a lot of people are looking at Taiwan stuff, and a lot of people are looking at like the underground art in Korea. I mean, I'll even admit it, like the shine on like K-pop stuff. I love K-pop, but the shine on it is like definitely causing a lot of people to be like, well, there's other stuff, and thus now people are looking at that.
Well, I think that the work that you and Leo started to do to route Asian tours, I can say on my end, one of the reasons that I pursued it so vigorously is that, I mean, first, the main reason I pursued it so vigorously is because I'm interested in it. I'm just interested in. This is to my own detriment, but I'm more interested in going to places that I just wouldn't otherwise go than I am into going places where I know I'm gonna have a great show. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like if I could go play Kazakhstan over Berlin, it's Kazakhstan every day of the week and twice on Sunday. If I never go to Berlin again for the rest of my life, totally fine. Do you know what I mean? Now, that hurts me financially that I feel that way, but that is how I feel. So, I mean, that's the main reason. But at a more superficial level, people going and doing those tours began to articulate something about them as artists. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, this is going to tie into a question. I hold the hypothesis or the projection or whatever, the prediction that routing Asian tours successfully is going to come to occupy for American artists and also, well, to an extent, European artists, the role that routing European tours once occupied. You understand what I mean? Like when I first started playing, getting over to Europe was hard. It was like hard. You had to get out there and tour the States and put out records and just hope that somebody noticed, and eventually you'd get over there. And like when my band Z's was like first touring and stuff, the only bands that were going over would be like Battles or Gang Gang Dance. Like you had to really be achieving to get those invitations. And now everybody fucking goes over there, dude. Like people who are just getting started are routing European tours. Like they're not routing US tours, and then they are routing European tours. You know what I mean? And the role that plays in sort of defining an artist is sort of falling off. And when you hear about like Machine Girl or Swan Meat or S-Talk or whatever, like routing an Asian tour, that it reminds me of how I felt about hearing about my peers in the aughts routing European tours. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's this like harder to hit target, harder to reach, and you're like, whoa, those motherfuckers have shit going on. They're playing where? Do you know what I mean? And I'm wondering, like, I don't know, but what's the experience for you like on the ground with that?
I mean, I think it's great. I think it's like, I think it's like a cool thing that Asians got to this point where we do have these like communities. And like my big thing is I don't like routing people to places that I wouldn't want to go to myself. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of a bad agent in that way, that I would never send an artist to a place I didn't want them. I would like go to myself.
Right.
But yeah, it's like because we got really cool communities in Tokyo and Korea, like and you met a lot of them like Shenzhen and Shanghai and Manila and Thailand. Like these are all like very similar minded to what we talk about as far as like this kind of like underground spirit and this like kind of like no compromises kind of thing.
Right.
And just like really fertile ground for experimentation and creation is like the idea of, I think, that synergizes all of us.
Right.
And to be able to have these people with, and we're all built our own thing, that we're in a space where, we can afford to pull together and bring some really cool artists to Asia that aren't hinging on like, a $5,000 meal card from Shanghai or something to bring them out. We can all just do our part and be okay.
Right.
And so it's really been fun figuring that math out. And it's been really rewarding to successfully have done it in the couple of years, 3 years I've been doing it. And COVID does have me worried that like, the math will make sense coming out of it, even 1 or 2 or 3 years. Fortunately, like most of the spaces that I do work with, they seem to be doing okay. But who knows? Who knows how long it is until we can officially travel between the countries.
Right. So let me ask you this: is this ability to do the work that you've been doing a function of these kinds of community spaces like OOMPH Gallery being kind of on the rise in the last decade? Is that something that's kind of newer and been growing recently, and now it becomes possible to sort of map that and like make that into like a route?
100%. It's these spaces being consistent and struggling on their own and building community. I don't know if you went to Kato Massacre in Tokyo. That's like one of my favorite spaces parties.
I did not. No.
Yeah, it's like they've been going for what? They had their 300th show. Like it's a weekly show, so they've been going for what, 6+ years. In the middle of in the western side of Tokyo, it's just kind of the hub where everybody goes underground to play. Mickey Blanco's played there, Swan Meat, Dasakura. I've sent my artists there. I probably would have sent you if you weren't already playing a big show in Tokyo. But it's just like you can see noise art, you can see hip hop, you can see pop musicians, you can see DJs, you can everybody. Everybody plays there. Everybody plays there, and everybody who books or works in music goes there. It's Wednesday night, and it's always full.
Amazing.
And so like stuff like that is beautiful. Is like gorgeous to me. That they just do what they do, and they're successful for what they are. And I'm blessed to like go there, travel, and talk with them, and work with them, and send my musicians there.
Right.
And creating these connections between our communities, between Tokyo, Taipei, and Korea, and Bangkok, Stathao Chainsaw, and Hong Kong, Absurd Tracks, and Oil, and all. That's like just a beautiful way to like do this like wonderful like circulatory system of kind of like the spirit that I want to have and want my friends who I book out here to experience.
Right. It's amazing that the work that you're doing. So last question on this: what, and this for both of you, but what do you attribute the rise in doing this type of organizational work, like Julia, like what you're doing? And something I'm just a little aside is that I really notice when I talk to spaces and when I go places, there's this kind of bifurcated model of venue where there's venues that are like, we're a venue or we're a gallery and like we do this thing and this is how we do it, and it's very like cookie cutter and cut and dry, and they're just like doing that like flipping burgers, you know what I mean? They're just like getting it done, And then there's this other kind of venue that's like, it's a venue, we do music, but we do other things. It's also a community space. People rehearse here. We're a meeting space for people. We have like a community program. We have a food bank, like whatever it is. And it takes on this much more multifaceted, more three-dimensional, more like for the most part, more kind of critically engaged. Like it's more venue or space as inquiry. Like how can a venue engage its surroundings? Like, what could this space mean to all different kinds of people? Like, yes, we have our predilections about music and art. We're going to do that. But, like, what else could we do? Do you know what I mean? And I really feel like that's on the rise. I'm kind of making an assumption that a lot of the spaces you're talking about have these properties. That could be wrong. But so back to my actual question. What do you attribute the rise in that type of work in broader Asia to, and as far as it kind of ramping up over the last decade?
Well, one of the things I would attribute it to is just kind of lack of space. It's, in my opinion, like it's, for example, in Taipei, like we mentioned previously, it's just like really hard to find new buildings, to new spaces, like that are being built that didn't exist before, because yeah, the city is already pretty like stabilized, and it's really hard to find like new land to build upon. So space is like a very in demand commodity. Like my art space, it's located in downtown, which is one of the most expensive areas in the city. And it's only because I'm able to collaborate with the hair salon upstairs that we're able to have a space there. Otherwise, yeah, it's just really hard to find the physical space to host these type of things. And so when you're sharing a space with other people, when space is such a rare or in demand, valuable commodity, you kind of have to get really creative in how you utilize it, who you share it with. And that's also like where community comes in, because it's kind of, it wouldn't happen. Like projects like these, they wouldn't even be given like new life, because if you were just relying on like the standard, typical, conventional algorithm of like, okay, find a space, set up a business, inhabit that space, and that space is just functioning as like having like just one function. In order to survive, in order to keep going, I feel like being multifunctional, being flexible, it was born out of necessity. What do you think?
Yeah, I think austerity has a lot to do with the rise of like these kind of central spaces. Honestly, bleakly, I think it's just I think for a lot of these cities, especially like Japan and Korea, it's just hard to live there.
It's super dense. The
super
city
dense,
is
and just like anywhere in the world, wages are getting smaller and costs are getting more. So what you're seeing is a lot of like kind of like almost like screaming need culturally for these like hubs that need to be kind of like there and protected, and like that people kind of feel like the last bastion of like what culture could be and what weirdo culture is and stuff like that. As far as like spaces being multifaceted, yeah, you see some of that, and I think it depends. I think it has a lot to do with the physical, how spaces are built physically. I think in Japan you'll see a lot less of that, honestly, because
Yeah.
a lot of the venues are just tiny because the buildings are tiny, the units are tiny,
Right.
and so you're not going to have like a meeting room and a venue and a kitchen in the same room, right? In the same rental space.
Yeah.
You're going to have like For Summit is literally stairs and then a room with a soundboard and a bar in the back.
Right.
That's it.
But interestingly, sorry to interrupt you, but interestingly, in the context of this conversation where we're talking about the rise and increase in this type of work in broader Asia, one of the things that makes Japan stand out, at least from a Western perspective, is that we've been aware of Japan as a subcultural hub since the early 90s. Do you know what I mean? And even the late 80s, right, with the work of people like John Zorn and then Kurt Cobain taking the Boredoms on tour and so forth, right? Like the noise scene in Japan and just like the out rock thing, that has this like historicity that like we have an association with, whereas learning about things that are happening in like Manila or Bangkok or Taipei or even Beijing, it's not like I'm sure we would all assume that something would be going on there, but we don't. It's not something we've been hearing about until very recently. So
sure.
it's interesting that the community with greater historicity, at least I'm not going to be relativistic, or I'm going to acknowledge that I am being relativistic. I'm talking about from our perspective, has these spaces that are more kind of utilitarian. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Anyways, but go on. But because I'm interested in why you think it is that there's been an uptick in this kind of work such that doing the work of routing these broader tours has seemed possible, or maybe, because again, it's I'm just seeing this from where I'm sitting, right? Maybe this has always been going on, and just the matter of connecting the dots is what's new. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know.
I think that was a big part of it. And for math-wise, it's just flight costs have been lower. It's easier to get housing in a lot of these places due to things like Airbnb, and that becoming more prevalent in countries like these. You're not visa it's visa processes are easier with the technological improvements a lot of these countries have had, including China. So you're seeing a lot of small increments in logistics adding up to higher accessibility for artists that previously would not be able to attain the legal or logistical whereabouts to do a tour like this.
Yeah, I also think that there are more and more artists that manage themselves or have are up and coming and have a manager, but then it's they are connected to a broader community globally that are trying to uplift and make recommendations to other artists. So I think through artists who have visited Taiwan, Taipei, they'll recommend to other artists who are looking to tour. They'll be doing a lot of their own research instead of this big management company will be planning the tour dates and where to go for the artist that they're representing. A lot of people are kind of doing it themselves, and so I think they're kind of getting a lot of info on and trying to collect and do their own research on what would be a worthwhile place to visit. And I think that really excites me and Alan when people reach out to us, because I get a lot of just random messages from people who are hey, I had a friend who toured there, or I had a friend who visited your space, and that'll just kind of reach out to ask if they can collaborate, and if there's a possibility of them, if there is a possibility to collaborate, then they're down to come through to Taipei, or maybe they are coming through Taipei and are looking to arrange for a show or two for themselves. I think kind of this DIY way of doing things is also allowing more artists to explore Taipei as a maybe not the main stop, but if they are trying to do a couple stops on their tour, it's definitely somewhere they want to stop off at, because it is also really cheap to fly within Asia.
Huh, interesting. Okay, that's I hadn't thought of that, but that makes complete sense. Okay, so last question for you guys. I said I was going to ask it. So when I visited, and my attention was brought to this facet of Taipei by the inimitable Tim DeWitt, who keeps coming up in this podcast. It'll be hilarious if he watches this. I mean, again, I'm going to keep acknowledging that I'm coming from having the perspective of an American and a New Yorker, but in my experience, even in my experience being in other Asian countries, the presence and the viscerality and the tangibility of what seemed to me to be historically practiced spiritual customs that often find expression in terms of processions and other ceremonies. I visited a temple on the way down the mountain from Tiger Mountain. It's on your left when you come down the mountain, and we saw it. We just went in, and there was this very elaborate. But see, this is wherein the difference lies. There was this very elaborate movement. I don't know what it was. I don't know anything about this, right? But it seemed like some type of ritual of some kind, and there was 3 men, and they were doing this kind of movement practice. It was not exercise. It was some kind of thing that they were doing that seemed to pertain to the temple. But it wasn't like an event. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like so many places in the world, these kinds of customs live really only in this very museumified, kind of calcified, behind the glass kind of way, right? And when I was in Taipei, at least 3 or 4 different times, I just happened to be somewhere. Actually, right after that, I went down. I was gonna get on the subway and go to a restaurant, and Tim was with me, and these people pulled up in a bus, like an old school bus kind of looking thing, and they jumped out and they just got these drums going, and everybody had these outfits and symbols, and they configured in this kind of, and they just started going up the mountain. And it was like super guerrilla. It was like, it didn't even seem like anybody was expecting it or anybody was there to see it or participate. It seemed like almost completely spontaneous. And Tim was like, dude, this is it. This is what I've been talking about. Like, you've got to come. And so then myself and my wife and my daughter, like, we followed this procession back up the mountain, and we actually lost track of Tim and ended up leaving. But it's like there's this presence of that kind of work that's like completely uncontrived, totally like not mediated or something. It's like it's just happening. You know what I mean? And that really stands out, and it has a very, very striking sonic presence and a very, again, from my perspective, sonic presence, visual dimension, performative, costume, so on. And I guess my question is, what is that experience like as Taipeiers? I don't know if that's a construction, but you know what I mean. And like, does this? Maybe I'm totally wrong and I'm just not getting it. But like, and also, does this presence inform the quality of cultural social space writ large in terms of the work that you guys do?
Right. So the first question was, how does that affect Taipeiers, and how do we, sorry, it's getting a little late, so I'm getting a little tired.
It's just like I guess, what's our impressions of it
Yeah.
as people who live here versus his impression as a person?
Yeah, so as someone who lives here, I mean, at first, when I first moved here, I was like very taken aback, but over time, you sort of get used to it, and it must seem really weird to someone who is seeing this for the first time, and it looks like it's not really for anybody, but actually, I think it's for the gods. So they're actually like performing and paying tribute to the gods as like a parade, a procession. Like it was probably on you probably, if you saw so many in a short amount of time, it was probably some sort of like, I don't know, some holy day.
There's just so many. There's just so many.
There's so many. You don't know.
So
you walk out of your house.
No one who lives here. No one, even if
we can't even keep track.
Even if you're 9 years old, born and bred in Taipei, you don't know.
Yeah, because there's so many, and also there's all these different types of temples. There's like Buddhist, there's like Taoist, and they all like Confucius. They also have their own little. They have their own communities, and they also have their own very specific traditions.
And honestly, I think they mix them up.
They also mix them up because I think in Taiwan it also becomes kind of this like, you don't even have to be religious to want to be able to participate, and also to be participating in those traditions, because it's just kind of a part of being Taiwanese. Like temples are everywhere. There's one every couple of blocks, and they range from like a tiny little dog house kind of size one to massive
multi-floor
in the middle of a residential area. And they're all like super ornate, and they're actually like these community hubs for people to be able to get together. So they also like will hold events for like kids or families. The bigger temples, like the one that you visited, they actually have like dormitories. So the temples, they used to be back in the day for travelers. If you are a wary traveler, like under Buddhist traditions, they won't turn anybody away. So if you were hungry or if you didn't have a place to stay, like they have to accommodate you. And so like, usually during lunchtime, like temples will serve free lunches. They're taking care of a lot of the homeless population here. It's really like it's a part of being Taiwanese and a part of daily life. Like, I'm not religious, but like I'll totally go to temple if I walk by. I'll pay my respects. I'll light some incense, and I'll like bow a couple times. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but like it just feels right. um, and yeah, like I think that it ties in like very strongly, and like it's a massive part of the Taiwanese identity. And I think like in a lot of like art and music, even like it could be it when people are questioning like what it means to be Taiwanese, I see the religious, like spiritual aspect come up a lot. Even like just even if it was just the aesthetics of it, it's just like you see those colors, you see the ornate like patterns, and then you know that that's Taiwanese. It's just because if if you were to go to like China, like they don't actually have a lot of religious like monuments. Like they mostly been torn down, and so like in Taiwan, like if you want to see like temples, if you want to see like Chinese architecture, like Taiwan is the place to go. Like I live in this area called Wanhua. It's like Ella mentioned previously, it's like kind of back in the old days, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was like the center of Taipei, and it's like the oldest area in Taipei. And it's like just so like rich with like varieties of people and characters and history. And like my dad grew up in this area, so that was like one of the reasons why I decided to move to this area, just because it's so cool to walk down the street and imagine like my dad walking home from school like through that alley or whatever. But last week or 2 weeks ago,
Couple weeks.
it was like 2-3 weeks ago. There was like a week long celebration. Like in my area, it's like the oldest area, and so there are like even more hyper religious people, super traditional people. And so there was this like week long celebration where what you saw that was happening, but like times 10 in size, and like happening all freaking day. And like fireworks going off all night. Like I look outside my window, I just see fireworks like shooting from like 3 different directions. It was insane. And it's illegal to like Taipei is usually super strict on like noise restriction after 10 p.m. But like even the police couldn't do anything about it because they would go until 7 a.m. fireworks till 7 a.m.
It's bigger than them.
It's bigger than them because like even the Taipei mayor like joined in on the parade, and like I'll call the police and they're like, I'm so sorry, like we can't do anything about it, like you're just gonna have to wait until it's over. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this is illegal. And they're just like, we're sorry, we can't do anything about them. We just have to let them finish. Like because if they stop the parade, if they like interjected at all, it can be seen as disrespectful, and that'll influence whoever was in charge of the police. So I guess like the Taipei mayor in the next election, like they're not going to win basically. Like Taiwanese people, like the popular people who care. Oh, is it cutting out?
No. I just said whoa because you were saying because like essentially like it's just incredible that like these religious organizations or affiliations actually can take.
I don't even
precedent.
know organization.
It's not even really it's just people
That's
who like are deeply traditional, which is
it's not like there's a church of Taiwan that's going around and saying we're gonna throw a party here, we're gonna throw a party here. It's people just like, hey, what are you doing next weekend? Oh, we're gonna get together and have some like festival thing. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. We'll do it too. Oh, we're gonna get some fireworks. Oh, I got a water buffalo. This one guy's just like, oh, I'm gonna put up a stage. We'll have some bands. Oh, I'm gonna throw a puppet show, and it just gets more and more out of control.
A lot of the fireworks they were put on by like just regular people setting off fireworks on their rooftops.
And then like the guys dancing up near the mountain, probably like, oh, the party said, okay, we're gonna go down there and dance. We got our outfits, we got everything, and it just ramps up into this huge thing that everybody's kind of equally like open forumly participating in
because everyone supports it.
Yeah, because as long as you're just doing it in the name of support of the
temple,
of the celebration,
then that's like something the old people are on board with.
If you ask someone, like a scholar or something, like what does this day mean? They're like, oh, it's this one God who. There's probably an origin story about that. None of that actually matters. None of that actually matters. It's just we're all gonna get together. We dance a lot at home. I'm gonna dance for like the entire block. You're gonna set off fireworks for the entire. You're gonna make your suit. This band's gonna play that stage.
Yeah, it's just like a big party. Like there will be this like moving stage with like neon lights, and there will be like strippers on stripper poles on this moving stage, just like blasting going down the street, like and it's like in the name of like the temples and the religion, but then there will be like all these strippers wearing bunny outfits.
That's why I say I think they make up like.
I think they make up
15,
50%.
20%
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. I feel like they like everyone just there is something going on. There's probably like a legit holiday or festival or whatever sacred day to it, but then everyone's just using it as an opportunity to like have a wild time and dance on the street.
And that's precisely why it's ungovernable, because it's not actually predictable.
Right. So, but when I'm hearing you say all of this, it's hard for me to imagine that being in a place where you have this example of spontaneous, self-elected collaboration and celebration that is so prevalent. You know, it's so prevalent that I was there for 3 days, and this is like one of the main things I wanted to ask you because it was such a standout. I can't imagine that doesn't inform the kind of work you guys are trying to do, because there's just this.
It 100% informs. Because I mean, the basis of temple work and what our work is community.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's collaboration, community, and looking out for each other. It's listening to the community. It's listening to your neighbors. It's talking to them versus not talking to them. Right. Word. Yes. That they're throwing a party for the gods or whatever. It's the same way we're getting together and trying to throw parties for
our communities.
That is so amazing. Guys, this is an amazing ending point, but that is really profound and gives me a lot to think about. But that's just such a beautiful statement and thing to hear you say and hear you guys talk about. So I think this is a good jumping off point. Plus, we're over 2 hours. But guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been really deep. And Alan and I have been talking about let me put it this a different way. I've been talking to Alan about trying to get back over there. So hopefully, Julia, we get to meet in person. And I'm going to do my little outro thing here so y'all can go back to the icon situation. But thank you guys so much.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Pleasure talking to you.
Cheers, guys. All right. Julia Cao, Alan Huang, OOMPH Gallery, awesome agency, customs. What a fascinating journey into a place very different from the situation we face here in New York and in other urban centers. That gave me a lot to think about. This has been Place of Assembly, produced by Hollow and Experimental Sound Studio Chicago in partnership with 8 Ball Radio. Support us on Patreon. What is it? Patreon.com/HollowNYC. And we've been featuring the label Quantum Natives. We're going to go out with a track by Terribilis. And thank you. See you next week. Happy holidays.
pajamas though.
Okay.